Welcome into the Commanders Report. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Thank you guys for joining me here. Kind of for a later one here today. I wanted to get in front of a camera and kind of give my live reaction, my instant reaction to the first episode of NFC East in-season Hard Knocks, featuring the Washington Commanders as well as the Philadelphia Eagles, New York Giants, and Dallas Cowboys. Got some great tidbits from the last week here for the Washington Commanders in their game week versus the Denver Broncos. I got some big takeaways for you guys here after just watching this here for the first time. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you guys like this video, we'll do more of them as the other episodes of the season come out. But I just wanted to kind of give you guys my initial reaction after this first episode because I thought it was really interesting. And my biggest takeaway coming out of this video and out of this episode is that I absolutely think the Washington Commanders have the right guy at head coach in Dan Quinn. And this episode really reminded me of how great of a culture builder Dan Quinn is, how great of a leader and culture setter and a tone setter that he is, and to be a great head coach in the National Football League, guys, it's more than just schematics, and I feel like that is kind of like the number one thing that gets looked at when it comes to the new hiring cycles and all this stuff. People look at what's an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator that is really doing a good job with schematics. And listen, man, schematics are an important thing, especially in the National Football League where talent is so even. You got to find schematic ways to find advantages and all that different stuff. And I'm certainly not trying to say schematics don't matter at the National Football League level and don't matter in terms of head coaching hiring, but I think Dan Quinn is kind of another example here, and this is kind of in the line of guys like Mike Tomlin, Dan Campbell, and others, where culture and being somebody that players want to play for, and doing all that stuff and really caring about your players and setting that tone every single week, bringing that juice, bringing that energy, is super, super important. Because like Dan Quinn says in the episode, the people in that locker room are world-class competitors. Those guys are the greatest competitors on the planet. They spend every waking hour of their day throughout the entire calendar year preparing themselves for, just a few weeks here during the NFL season where they get to be hyper competitive and they get to, put their bodies on the line to try and achieve something truly special in the pantheon of American professional sports. And Dan Quinn just gets that. He just does. And, he brings so much juice, so much energy. I mean, I think he swore about 100 times in this one episode alone. And obviously, it's a 1 hour, episode where it has to feature the Cowboys, it has to feature the Eagles, and it has to feature the Giants. So honestly, in terms of the total amount of screen time, the Commanders might have had the least amount of screen time. Maybe the Giants did. Obviously, I didn't do the math. I just got done watching the episode. But, the Commanders definitely weren't featured as much as the Cowboys and Eagles were. Yet I thought Dan Quinn just shined through as an amazing example of what great leadership and what great, culture building looks like. And, everything from, his pregame speeches to the guys before they played the Denver Broncos to him, immediately going for two when the Commanders scored that potential game-winning touchdown in overtime against the Broncos on Sunday night. To his conversation in the car talking about how much he cares about trying to turn around this season, to try and figure out the why and how this season has kind of gone off the rails. And we've talked about that on the channel, the reasons why this season has been an utter disappointment, where now the Commanders have lost 7 straight games in a row. But I thought a great quote from Dan Quinn came right at the end of the game after they lost, and he's given his speech to the guys, and he said, "We lost, but we're not lost anymore." And I just absolutely love that, because I think that perfectly encapsulates the way that the Commanders played on Sunday night. I mean, they went out there, and I thought they were well prepared. They were well coached. You could tell they played with heart, they with passion. I mean, that was a 3-8 football team that was playing like the season in like a playoff berth was on the line. They were playing like it was a playoff game. Nobody's checked out. Everyone's playing for each other. Everyone's playing for their head coach. And It was just a really fun game to watch on Sunday. It just was. And to have a head coach like Dan Quinn, where he can take a team that has lost 6 games in a row, the season is over, they have no chance of going to the playoffs. It can be really easy for players to put their foot off the gas, try and get theirs, and try pad their stats and make their film look good and prepare for the future, all that different stuff. No, man, this Washington Commanders team and that culture is completely still bought in. They're still in it. They're still locked in. And you could tell, how much this team cares by the way they reacted to the game and to the result on Sunday night, because they played so hard, they fought so hard, and they came up just short, literally just a couple inches away. If Nick Bonito doesn't get his hand on that final pass from Marcus Mariota, the Commanders were probably talking about this as an awesome win, but instead we're talking about this as a valiant effort in a loss. And, we talked about on the channel, losing games at this point, especially games as hard fought as that game, it's okay. It really is. Those are the types of games that build your culture, that prove to the people in the locker room that this is an organization and this is a coaching staff that they can believe in moving forward, and that they can really trust with their bodies, with their hearts and with their emotions, all that stuff that they wear on their sleeves every single time they go out there on the football field. And I just think that Dan Quinn, when this team does get in a spot roster wise where they can get back to getting back into the playoffs and start competing for division championships and NFC championships and hopefully Super Bowl championships in the years to come, having a guy like Dan Quinn in there, man, that just brings so much juice, so much fire. He's exactly the type of guy that this organization needs. So if there's any talk out there about firing Dan Quinn or anything like that, that talk just needs to stop, because he is absolutely the right guy and the right captain for this ship. I'm excited to see more of Jayden Daniels in the future episodes of Hard Knocks when he does eventually get back, because it sounds like he will be back at some point this season. Maybe not this week versus the Vikings, but probably soon, especially for this final 3-game stretch where you get to play the Eagles twice and the Cowboys once. You get the chance to play spoiler to a number of your different rivals there with Jayden Daniels on the field. And if you can go like 2 for 3 on that final 3-game stretch against 2 pretty decent football teams, I think that would be really positive for this Washington Commanders team heading into what is going to be an absolutely massive 2026 offseason for this football club. Because obviously you're running out of time with Jayden Daniels on his rookie contract. You want to make the very most of that. Unfortunately, they have obviously wasted one of those seasons this year with a bunch of different injuries and just a lot of bad luck and some bad coaching on the defensive side of the ball, some bad personnel decisions in the front office by Adam Peters and Dan Quinn. But hopefully they've learned some of those lessons. And what I love about what Dan Quinn has done this season, and kind of what the message that he conveyed in this Hard Knocks episode, was that he's never going to be somebody that gives in. He's never going to be somebody that's not continuously looking for answers, and he's going to bring that juice and that energy and that fight every single day in that Commanders building. And the locker room in the National Football League reflects their head coach, and it reflects their quarterback as well. And I just love the combination of Dan Quinn and then Jayden Daniels and Marcus Mariota, because Quinny, he's just he's so fiery. He's swearing on the sideline. He wears his emotions on his sleeve, all that different stuff. And then you've got the calm, cool, collected quarterbacks. And I think that creates a locker room that fights for each other, that brings the juice and brings the energy, brings the focus every single week, but also has the poise and the calm under pressure. And I just think that is a beautiful combination of personalities that we have here in Washington. And even though you're sitting at this point 3-9, season's clearly over, there's still very clearly hope for this football team on the horizon. Better days are clearly ahead with this head coach and with this quarterback room. And it was great to see Terry back out on the field last week, and we get to see more of that heading into future weeks. So I'll leave you guys with this. I thought it a really cool moment, and something that kind of drives the point home here, that Dan Quinn's culture just really shined through to me in this episode, was when they celebrated quarterback coach Tavita Pritchard being hired as the next head coach of the Stanford Cardinal. Everybody in that room, going crazy for him. They have him do a speech in front of the crowd and in front of the team. You know, he just talks about the culture that Dan Quinn has in Washington, and talked about how much he's going to miss the Washington Commander organization and Coach Q and the guys in that locker room and the brotherhood that he described that the Commanders have. And that is something that Dan Quinn has cultivated, that brotherhood inside the Commanders locker room. That's not going anywhere. And as long as they can stay healthy in future years, learn from some of the mistakes in team building that they had this offseason, and take that into future off seasons. And, they just never stop that fight. I just don't think that this Commanders team, long term is going to get lost under the tutelage and under the watchful eye of Dan Quinn. So just wanted to give some love to Dan Quinn today, because I really thought that he reminded us in this episode, why he was a big-time candidate for Coach of the Year last year, why he got this team after just one season removed from the Ron Rivera era where, they had the number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft. It's great to have the quarterback and to be drafting high enough to take a guy like Jayden Daniels, but it takes more than that to have that drastic of a turnaround, and that starts with the culture, and that's what Dan Quinn has cultivated here in Washington. Unfortunately, it hasn't resulted in a great sophomore campaign in his tenure here in Washington, but we talked about a number of the reasons why that has been the case this year, and I really believe, guys, that this team is one good offseason away from getting back to the NFC Championship game in 2026, and this time being in legitimate contention to go and win it, win this division, for the first time in many years. I think that this team's future is still very bright, and I think Dan Quinn is a big part of that bright future. So that's where I'll leave you guys here this evening. I really do appreciate all of you guys stopping by here for today's edition of the Commanders Report. I'll have another video that comes out on the Commanders tomorrow. Might get some injury updates. We'll see what we got for you guys tomorrow, but until then, hail to the Commanders.